Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're gonna paint this supermoon rising over an old country road. Now I know the supermoon is long since gone, but with all the amazing photos that I've been seeing online of everybody's supermoon, I was super inspired, see what I did there, to paint a supermoon for you. We're also gonna be doing something really fun and adding some glow paint to our moon so that you can enjoy it after the lights are out as well. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, and let's get started. To start out, I've already painted this canvas in a gray color, and I didn't worry about getting a specific gray color, and I didn't even really worry about blending it in all the way, as you can tell. We just need an underpainting here so that we don't have to work so hard when we add a little texture to the sky. And by texture, I mean just a little bit of movement, not necessarily clouds, but when we add the glow paint later, when you apply the glow paint really thick, you can see it a little bit. And if I add it on top of this, you'll see little white bits where the glow paint is thicker. So I'm just gonna kind of scribble some different grays and whites through here so that the glow paint doesn't show up too much in the daylight. And I'm gonna use my scrubby cloud brush, but you can use whatever you want. Like I said, we're not necessarily painting clouds here. If you wanna give a certain shape, like a swirl around where you want your moon, you can do that. You can be really random with it. I'm just gonna come in and mix up a gray color fairly similar to the background, just slightly lighter or darker. And it's not perfectly mixed on my brush. I have some darker and some lighter spots. And I'm just gonna start scrubbing in. I'm really just using the tip of the brush. Just kind of start scrubbing some of it in, just to get a little bit of dimension into the sky. Every time I go back for more paint, it'll be a little bit lighter or a little bit darker. I'm not gonna try and go too terribly different. And I'm only gonna take this roughly halfway down the canvas, probably not exactly halfway, maybe just a little bit higher than that. I just wanna make sure that when we add our horizon, that I've brought the clouds down. I say clouds, like I said, I'm not actually painting clouds. I just want to make sure that I've brought this down far enough that when I paint in the horizon, I don't have a weird spot where you can see the underpainting. If you're not using the glow paint, then you don't really have to worry about doing this. You can have a nice, smooth, blended sky if you want. But notice how subtle the color changes are here. I don't have big drastic shifts from dark to light. If you have my cloud brush, how I'm using it is, I'm not doing it flat like I do when I actually paint clouds. I'm coming right at it with the point of the brush and just kind of squidging around in a circle. See that? And if you're not using my cloud brush, but you're using a longer bristle brush, you can do the same thing. It works better if the bristles are longer, like this one. All right, there's our clouds, and I'm gonna let this dry completely, then we'll come back and add some glow paint. To apply the glow paints, I'm gonna use my scrubby brush, but it doesn't have to be a scrubby brush. I'm not actually gonna be scrubbing. You could even just use a filbert here if you like. I'm gonna start with the white, and you really don't need a ton of it. I'm just gonna start with what's in the lid here. So I'm gonna pick up a good amount, and just kind of start laying it on down toward the bottom where my horizon's gonna be. See, I'm not scrubbing it so much as just kind of dashing it. Remember, the thinner the glow paint is, the less it's gonna show up when it dries. The thicker it is, the more intense the glow is gonna be. But you're also gonna see it a little bit in the daylight. You'll be able to see a little bit of kind of a translucent spot, which is exactly why I did the background the way I did. And I'm just starting at the bottom and kind of working it up, almost Aurora style, but you can do this however you want. If you just want to paint it all solid or get some interesting designs, whatever you want to do. Now, unless you're painting in the dark, once this dries, you might have a little bit of a hard time seeing where you've put it. But if you look at it from the side, you'll be able to see the texture, because the texture of this paint is a little bit matte. So you should be able to tell the difference between it and your canvas. If it's dark where you're painting, then just turn off the light after a couple of minutes and you can make any adjustments, add more wherever you need it. I'm not worried about covering all of the canvas. I can have some little spots here and there where there's no glow paint. So see, I'm just kind of dabbing and rolling my brush and then just kind of rolling it and pushing it up, almost like we did the background on the Enchanted Apple painting. Kind of similar to that. Don't worry about where your moon is going to go, because when we paint with the acrylic paint over top of this, it will cover it. So just get it all on there. Worry about that later. I forgot to mention that I am using this brush dry because I don't want to thin this paint out any more than it already is. Just fill in this little spot. Get a little more up through here. I think it's also really fun to paint this when you can't see it glowing, when you don't have the option to, and then seeing what happened when you're done. Because you can always go back and add more. So when moving from one color to the next, make sure you clean your brush off really good. And then I'm drying it off on my paper towel really well, again, so I don't thin out the paint too much. You don't have to wait for this to dry. It's okay if it scoots around with the other color. It's not really going to mix because the glow paint has little particles in it, and depending on the size and shape of the crystals or particles, that's what determines the color. So when you mix the two different colors of glow paint, again, you're not going to see, mix the blue and the orange. You won't get mud. You'll see little particles of the blue and the orange through there. So don't worry about that. And now we're using aqua the same way. I'm going to start down into where my white paint is. And just kind of do the same thing. Take it up a little bit higher though. So I tried to show you a little bit of what this looks like in the dark, but it's really hard to get it on my video camera. I should be able to get a photo of it when I'm done. But until then, we're just going to kind of paint blind, and I think that's going to be fun. Again, washing off my brush, drying it on my paper towel really well to move on to the next color. And now we're going to use this purpley color. And since this is starting to become dry, again, if I look at it from the side, I can see exactly where I've put the other paint, so I can get this down into some of those spots I didn't get and make sure I'm getting a good coverage. And I'm going to fill most of the top of this sky with this purple. So there, when I hold the light like that, you can kind of tell where the different colors are. You can see the white is down here, the aqua, which glows really well, is right here, and the purple is up here. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of how those colors are laid out. I might bring a tiny bit of that white back in and just bring it up a little higher into the aqua. All right, now I'm gonna let this dry completely so that I'm not dragging the glow paint around when we start adding our other elements. All right, now I've got a watercolor pencil and I'm using black. You can use chalk or whatever you have. And I'm gonna use this old roll of tape to trace on my moon. So place your stencil wherever you want it, or you can freehand it if you're comfortable with that. And then I'm just gonna sketch around the outside of it. And because this is watercolor pencil, I don't have to worry about getting it perfect. If I get a line that goes outside of it, it'll just wipe right off with a damp brush when I'm done. So just a general idea of where you want it. I'm going to take an angle brush and mix up a gray color. It doesn't matter what color of gray, it can be darker or lighter than the background. Just make sure that you can see it. I think I'll go a little bit darker than the background. And use the chisel edge of the brush when you're drawing the line. Don't try and do it like this, because the more pressure you put on the brush, the more the bristles will spread out, and then you'll lose control of the line. So put your hand on your canvas if you need to. Use that edge and just draw that circle around there. Then you can go back and use the flat part of the brush. Make sure every couple minutes you stand back and look at it and just make sure that it's round. If it's not, just keep making little adjustments. All right, while our moon dries, we're gonna start sketching in the road and everything. So I've got my watercolor pencil and my ruler, and the first thing we wanna do is mark in our horizon. So I'm just gonna place it right about here. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, the horizon, because we're gonna add some other elements that are gonna obscure it a little bit. So just get an indicator to let you know where that horizon is about. There's my horizon. Now we want to find the center because our road is going to terminate in the distance. So I'm going to bring my ruler down just a tiny bit below my horizon so that I can make a mark that I'll be able to see in a minute. And since this is a 12-inch canvas, the center is going to be at 6 inches. Now what I'm going to do is make a little 1/4 of an inch mark just below my horizon. And that is where my road is going to be. So just a little mark about a 1/4 of an inch wide. I'm not going to have my road disappear to a point because I'm going to have a little mountains back here, and with the road not meeting to a point and with the mountains behind it, it's going to look like maybe we're coming up a little bit of a hill and the road continues down the other side. And I wish I had a little bit of a shorter ruler for this, but all I have is this giant yardstick. So now I need to find the center at the bottom. So again, I'm going to make a little line at the 6-inch mark, and that's the center of my canvas. Now down here we're going to have road, white line, road, white line, road, and I want the white lines to seem like we're standing between them. So I'm going to make my white line 1 inch on either side of my center line, so it's about 2 inches wide. Everything in between here is going to be painted black like the road. I'm going to make another line right here at the 2.5-inch mark from here, and that's going to be part of the stripe in the road. And I'm going to go over 2.5 inches again from this line and do another one. So hopefully you can see my lines here. It'll become a little bit more apparent as we keep going. This is a really easy way to do some very simple perspective. Mark it out in the foreground, mark it out in the distance, connect the points. So let's go ahead and connect those points. So I'm going to come from the edge of my 1/4 inch mark here down to the edge of this one that I made for my white stripe. And I'm going to draw from there. Whoops, make sure your ruler stays steady. And then I'm going to do the one over on this side. Again, from the outer edge on the opposite side of that 1/4 inch mark down to the line I made here. And then these ones. Now, don't worry about your center mark. That was just so that we could start marking these. We're not going to do anything with this mark. Now these ones, as we bring them up here, we're not going to connect them in the center again, but it's going to be pretty close. So start on that line, and I'm going to bring it up here just to the left of center, just barely. Maybe a little more than that. That's a little too far. And we'll do the same thing with this one. Our road is going to have a little bit of some banks next to it with some grasses. So I'm going to start from that line again, this little 1/4 inch line here. And I'm going to bring it up kind of steep. Just kind of eyeball it and decide where it looks best for you. And make that line. We do want to make sure this one is about in the same spot. So I'm going to come across and just put a little mark on the other side where that line is. So right there. And then I'll connect on this side. Our moon is now pretty dry, and I'm going to go back to my angle brush, get some black, maybe with just a hint of white, just so it's not pure black. And I'm just going to kind of scrub some little shadow areas into here. Just wherever I feel like I want it to be a little bit darker. Keep a damp, clean brush with you while we do this part, because if you go outside of your moon, you want to immediately use the edge of the brush and just clean that off. Remember, don't try and clean it off like this, because you'll just kind of smear it and then you'll get a fuzzy haze. Always use the edge. I'm going back to my cloud or my scrubby brush now, and I'm going to grab some white. There's a little bit of black that I'm picking up, but that's okay. I'm mostly just picking up white. And I'm going to kind of start stippling it on here. You can scrub, you can slash, you can do this however you want. And I'm just lightly tapping. Go into that dark area we just laid down, and notice I'm picking up a little bit of it. And we're just going to get a really abstract kind of moon. Don't be afraid to go all the way to the edge. If it goes off into your sky, just immediately stop, grab your damp brush, and clean that up. When I go into the dark, I'm lightening my pressure on the brush just a little bit, because the same principle holds here as when we're filling in a background. The more pressure you apply, the more paint you're going to lay down. The less pressure you apply, the more you're going to blend the colors together. So where I want to lay down white paint, I put a good amount of pressure on my brush. All the way to the edge there. Where I want to kind of blend it in with that darker color, I'm just barely touching. And that's helping blend. Just don't let that paint dry when it goes outside of your moon, because you'll never get it off of there. If you feel like you're starting to lose too much of your shadow, just grab a little bit more black, mix up another gray color, and do the same thing. You can even go down to a smaller scrubby brush to really get in there and get some of the small crater details. So I'm just going to add a couple shadows, maybe a few bright highlights, and then we'll be about done with the paint on our moon, and we can let it dry and start on our glow paint. Just really break those shapes up. Don't make polka dot shapes. A lot of times when we do a moon, you guys show me your moon and you really hate the way it looks. And sometimes I feel it's because we start getting these kind of circular shapes like that going and we don't know how to break it up. So let all of your little pats kind of overlap, but break them out into irregular shapes. Super light pressure so that you don't keep carrying that paint farther and farther, it just fades out. If you get a hard line you don't like, again, just lightly tap around it and kind of take it out. We don't need polka dots or real regular shapes on here. And you can keep working on this moon until you like it. Keep going over it with some highlights and some shadows until it's just what you want to see. Get it too dark somewhere, punch some highlights on it. Super, super light pressure, barely touching right there. Just get one more bright spot up here and we'll be done. So sometimes I'm not very smart and I forget to push record. All I did was lay in my mountains here at the very top edge of my horizon. I just mixed up a color that was almost black and used the edge of my angle brush to kind of just wiggle them in, about like that, and then just fill them in. And you don't have to worry about making mountains clear over here because we're gonna have trees that are gonna cover it. I just kind of tapered it off to the side just in case any of that happens to show. Now let's do the same thing on our road, except now we're recording so you can actually see this. So I'm mixing up a dark color. It's almost black. It might be just a tiny bit lighter than what I did on the mountains. So I threw a little bit of white in there. And let's start filling in this black area. Now remember, these two lines are the white lines of the road. So I'm going to use the edge of the brush, go right up against that line, and bring it down. Same thing on this side. And on this side. Just clean up that line a bit. It's really hard painting around a camera sometimes. If I can see, then you can't, and vice versa. It doesn't have to be a perfectly clean line because I am going to put the white over it. And we'll just fill it all in. It doesn't have to be a perfectly solid color because again, this is just our underpainting for this area. We're going to add shadows and highlights on it. Use a little extra water to help you to get that paint to spread if you need to. I'm not using matte medium here, but we will be using matte medium once we come in and start laying in the highlights and shadows. All right, now we're gonna add our grasses for the hillside here, and I'm gonna use this natural hair bristle brush. And it's just a stiff old bristle brush, and I get asked a lot of questions about where do you find these brushes. You can usually find them in super cheap value packs at any craft store. They're not expensive brushes. But if you can't find this, just anything kind of puffy and old that you're comfortable making grasses with. So I'm just gonna get some black, just black on its own. And right in here, I'm not gonna worry about going over the edge of the road because this is just the underpainting. I'm gonna paint over all of this anyway, but I am gonna try not to go too much into the road so I don't lose my line. Just take that all the way up, start drawing some little grasses. Now you don't have to worry about your perspective too much here. You know, as you get farther away, your grasses would get smaller and smaller, but since this is just the underpainting for it and we're just using black, you're not really gonna see any of that detail. Just keep that in mind when we start adding the highlight colors for the grasses. You would want it to get smaller as we go back. I'm gonna take that right up over the horizon and up over the edge of the mountain. Really the only mountain part that I'm worried about keeping is right here toward the center. I'm gonna get some more and I'm gonna do it the same thing on this side. Just using the tip of the brush and kind of scraping up to get a little bit of a grassy shape. All right, let's add our trees. So I'm gonna use my angle brush and get some black paint. I did wet my angle brush in the jar and then just wiped it off on the edge. I'm gonna make sure that the tip of my angle brush is pointing down, and I'm just gonna make some trunks. Don't worry about the shape. Don't try and draw branches or anything. You're really just giving yourself an indication of where you're gonna put the foliage on the trees. These are gonna be like evergreens. You'll see some of these trunks through it, so add a few more than just the ones you want for height. And as we get down toward the point, our trees are gonna get a little bit closer together and they're gonna get shorter. And that's gonna help them seem like they're moving away from us. Now, if you wanna take these over top of your moon, you can. I'm not going to. I'm gonna keep them separate from my moon. And same thing on the other side. Now I'm going back to my natural bristle brush and I cleaned it in the jar and then I dried it really well on a paper towel. We're gonna do something very similar. I'm gonna pick up a bit of black, but it's mostly just on one corner. And I'm gonna use the shape of the brush to help me make the foliage in the trees. So I'm gonna start at the top and I'm just very lightly gonna touch. And that's all I'm gonna do for the foliage there. So just light pressure. I'm not pressing the brush, it's just touching. And I'm not just doing it down the line, I'm kind of bringing it out a bit too, to give the indication that this is a nice big tree, just kind of living out here in the countryside, and it doesn't have to be completely filled in, so you can still see the trunk and you can see the sky through it. And I'm going to do that all the way through here, just fill in all these little trees. Especially back here, just super light pressure, because you don't want too big of blobs on your trees here because they'd be in the distance. They wouldn't have quite the amount of detail. And of course, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. that's about as easy as you can go to make evergreen trees in a silhouette form anyway. Let's give our little grasses and bushes some more definition. So I've got some black. I'm going to get just a little bit of white and mix up a gray color. And I'm going to do this the same way. I'm just going to kind of touch and flick. And you don't have to cover this entire thing. If you cover the entire thing, you're going to lose the impression that it's a dynamic hill. It's just going to be a big gray triangle here. So I'm just kind of working it in little patches. And of course, as we move back, like I said, you're just kind of touching. You're not really giving it the same swoop like we are up here. But see how I have lighter and darker patches in there. And then I'm even going to get a little bit more white and really just kind of touch through here. I'm barely touching. See how I'm not depositing very much white? I'm not getting those big streaks like I did with the black or that gray even. Just adding some highlight to the tips of some of those grasses. Maybe just a little more white. Maybe it's some little flowers growing on the side of the road or something. I might even add just a tiny bit and just barely touching a few places in these closest trees. Let's move you up so you can see what I'm doing on the trees. Just kind of touching a few spots, mostly just in these closest trees. Just with that white. And since my trees are still wet, it is streaking in there just a little bit. If you feel like you get too much in a spot, just get some more black. And just cover it up. Let's finish up our grasses and then we can move on to the road. All right, let's paint our lines in the road. So I'm going to grab some white and I'm picking up a little bit of black there, but that's okay because I don't really want any pure white or even pure black for that matter in this painting. So I've got my angle brush. Remember, the tip of the angle brush always drags, and I'm just going to fill this area in with white. So you guys might have noticed that I've got a fancy new angle brush here that you've never seen me use before. And this is one of the samples that was made for me for my own line of brushes. And so far I really like this angle brush. The last one I didn't like quite so much, but this one is really good. So this is probably the type of brush and the type of bristles that you'll see in our detail brushes when they finally come out. Now let's add a little bit more dimension to our dark parts of the road. Now, if you've ever noticed when you're driving down the road, it's usually a little bit darker in the center of the lane and a little bit lighter towards the edges. Now, I don't know why that is, but it is. So I didn't clean off my brush. I still have the white on there. I'm just going to take the white that's in there and start mixing it into some black. And I'm going to use some matte medium for this part. And the reason I'm using the matte medium is because this paint is dry, and if I start using these other colors, I'm really just going to paint over it, and then it's kind of pointless to have it there. But if I use the matte medium, then I can just focus on adding the highlights and not have to worry about losing this dark part or having to paint it all back in. So I've got a bit of a lighter color. Let's just test it up against the road there. I think I'm going to go a little bit lighter. That's good. And then I'm going to mix it in with some matte medium. So the matte medium, remember, it helps us blend a little bit, even on dry colors. So while this paint's not actually going to blend in with this dry paint, it'll make it just a little more translucent so that it appears to be blending in. Now the first thing I'm going to do is redefine my line here that I lost when we were adding the grasses. So I'm just going to go right back over that line. And now that we're adding some detail here, remember your perspective, so we're going to put very little pressure on the brush here, so the line is very thin, and then as we come forward, we can put more pressure on it. And that's going to help give us that illusion of a road narrowing into the distance. So see how I press my brush flatter, and I got a wider line there. And we want to remember to do that and always keep our brush strokes going in the same direction. Don't start going up and down or this way, that way. Keep them going in the same direction. Light brush pressure in the back and heavier brush pressure in the front. Now I know that doesn't look blended at all. So I'm just going to wipe some of that off, and I'm just going to pick up medium. That's all I picked up. And with the medium, I'm going to streak down over top of that line. Same thing on this side. Light pressure, heavier pressure as we come forward. And since I was chatting, I kind of lost my perspective, so I'll mix up a little bit more dark color, grab some medium. That's what happens when you talk and paint sometimes. You say one thing, you do something else. That's looking a little bit better except for up here. So I just got some medium. And again, just like whenever I tell you, whenever we're painting with black and white, there's no reason, and really this goes for no matter what color you're painting in, but especially with black and white, there's no reason that you have to settle for a blend or a highlight or a shadow that you don't like. If you absolutely hate the way your road is turning out, then let it dry and paint over it later. But I don't want you to say, oh, my road looks terrible, and so I just quit. Don't quit. Let it dry and do it again. I think that's looking a little bit better. I just lost a little bit of my highlight in the distance here. All right, let's get that lighter color again. A little more matte medium. And we'll do the same thing on this side. Super light pressure. Draw that line back in. Heavier pressure as you come forward. I am turning my brush flat here rather than drawing the lines with the angle all the way through. That would be craziness. Just a bunch of medium. See how it gives it that look like it's blending in with that darker color? We'll do our darker color again, just to keep them looking balanced. So whenever you're having a bit of a hard time blending something together, just pick up medium, nothing else. And that will really help. Now in the center line, we're going to leave it a little bit darker because I don't really know why the road is usually darker where the wheels don't go. I don't know if it's the wheels are forcing, you know, dirt and stuff into the road and that's why it makes it appear lighter, or what it is, but the center line doesn't usually get as much tire traffic as the lanes, so we'll leave it a little bit darker, like this area here. And I really am just using the chisel edge of the brush here because it's a much narrower area. I think I will lighten it up just a little bit though. I don't want it darker than the middle of the road in the lanes. All right, let's fix up our white lines and then we're about done with the road. So I picked up just white. Just gonna clean up some of these lines and then add a few spots in here that are a little bit whiter than the rest of it. And I'm gonna use some of my medium for that too. I just think it looks more dynamic and interesting if it's not a solid color. That's why I'm not just painting the lines in the road pure white, because the lines in a real road probably wouldn't be pure white, and not all over the place anyway. There might be some dark spots here and there, some dark streaks. Maybe they're really dirty or just old and worn. All right, now we're gonna add some glow paint to our moon. And I decided to use the orange and red because I wanna make it seem kind of like a harvest moon. Again, make sure you have a clean, damp brush, just so you can clean up any of the glow paint that gets outside of the moon. And I'm gonna use the same brush I used on the background. So if you didn't use a scrubby brush, if you just used a filbert, that's fine. You can use that here too. And I'm gonna take this orange color, this isn't the dark one, the red one, and I'm pretty much gonna fill in the entire moon with this. Just kind of polka dotting to get rid of some brush strokes because I don't want bright orange curvy brush strokes in my moon. I'm just kind of spreading it on and then dabbing it around. All right, now I've got it all covered. So I'm gonna take some more, and in these bright spots, I'm gonna add the light orange color fairly heavily. Cleaned off my brush, dry it on my paper towel again. And we're gonna go into the red. And the red, I'm gonna concentrate pretty heavily into the shadows. But I'll break it out into the orange again. I don't want them to be completely separate. Then it'll just look like red and orange polka dots. And the orange is still wet, so I'll kind of mix them and drag them around together a bit. If you don't get it exact, that's okay, because once it's glowing in the dark, you're really not going to see the white or the black or any of that. You'll just see the colors that you put on top of it. So you could actually do it completely different if you wanted to. And I know our moon looks really, really white right now, but again, just like it dried clear, kind of translucent-y clear in the background, it'll do the same thing on the moon, and those dark colors will come back. Let's give our road just a little bit more dimension. I've got this little liner brush and I'm just gonna get some white, maybe pick up just a hint of that gray, again, just so I don't have a pure white. We're gonna add some little reflectors on the side of the road. And again, just like anything else, they'll be wider and a little bit longer toward the front. And as they go back, they'll get a little more narrow and shorter. And back here, I'm really just gonna kind of give the suggestion of the little reflectors. If you get one that's too much, just mix up a darker color and just go over it. Let's get that same white color and we'll add a couple of little reflector mile marker type pulls on the side. So put your hand on your canvas and notice I've got my hand right on the edge of my canvas. You can just see my pinky there. That's going to help me draw a straight line because I'm just going to drag my hand down the canvas. And then I've got my straight little line. Each one, again, is going to be a little bit shorter and maybe not quite as wide as the one before. If it helps you, you can always get your ruler, since we did this one first, put your ruler at the top of this one and connect it with that 1/4 inch mark over here. Draw a line and then all of your little pulls would reach that line. So let me show you here. If I have my ruler at that 1/4 inch line and at the top of this pole here, then that's how tall they would all be. So if I were to draw a line from here to here, none of them would extend above this pole and they wouldn't be below it either. So right about there, I'll just hold it there and then I know this one goes to here. And if I do another one back here, it's only that tall. Probably not that wide though. My brush was kind of dry, so I lost control of it. It would just be very, very narrow. Same thing over here. So right at the corner of my road. All right, the lines of my road are pretty dry now. I'm gonna take my angle brush, and this is the white glow paint. I'm not gonna make it lumpy and weird like I did in the moon or in the sky. I'm just gonna smooth it on, almost like I'm applying varnish or something, just on top of the white. Don't let it go outside of the white. Now let's go back to our little liner brush and do the same thing on the reflector pulls. And the little reflector marks on the side of the road. You can add that pretty thick right here. Make those nice and bright when it's dark. And you really can add the glow paint wherever you want. I just really wanted to show off the moon and the road and the sky. And you know, I think up here in the sky, I'm gonna get some good sized blobs of this and just add some little stars or something. Just kind of here and there. You don't really want to flick this paint because you kind of have to thin paint down to get it to flick well. And if you thin this down too much, you don't really see it all that well anymore. And let's sign it. All right, so here is our scene. With the UV light, you can see exactly where I put the glow. You can kind of get an idea of the colors in the sky and the way it shows through the trees. The white really needs a while to charge before you can see it, as does the purple at the top. But the red shows really, really well. But if you were to put this in the sun for an hour or so, this would glow really, really brightly. And there is your super moon over a highway. Whether you painted this with the glow paint or not, I hope you enjoyed painting it with me, and I hope you learned a few new techniques that you can take on to other paintings. As always, I would love to see what you do with this painting. You can join our Art Monster Squad Facebook group. There's a link in the description below, or you can post it on my Facebook page. There's also a link in the description below to that. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and maybe share it with a friend who you think would like it as well. If you haven't yet already, make sure you subscribe to my channel so that you can paint with me every week. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.